HMNS Dino Dig 2022, Day 4. Let's rock. Welcome to the HMNS Dino Dig 2022, Day 4. That's a mouthful. Recap. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. Honestly, I would love to make this podcast just the conversation I've had today between me and Chuck Leah. Holy moly. I know some of you listening to me right now know who Chuck Leah is and know all about his history. I didn't know. He's a freaking music legend. And his collection rivals the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum. He has been on 23 world tours. He's a world-class musician with an illustrious career. I personally had no idea. I'm saying, one of my major influences growing up, because I'm a musician too, was obviously Stevie Ray Vaughan. I used to put on Texas Flood and jam out in the garage for hours learning to play guitar to a record of Stevie Ray Vaughan. And Chuck's like, oh yeah, I knew Stevie really well. His photographer is my photographer. The stories Chuck has. I'm going to make it a point, and I think the museum will probably be okay with this. I just want to have Chuck on here to regale music history in life. He thinks it'll be kind of boring, but he's being really modest. Chuck is being so modest. A lot of musicians, illustrious musicians have big egos. I mean, that's not a stretch to say. Chuck is one of the most down-to-earth, humble human beings you will ever meet, and just the stories flow like a waterfall. Incredible jaw-dropping stories. I told him, and I'll get onto the actual dig after this. I'm fanboying here right now as a fellow musician and lover of music. I told him, Chuck, some of your stories are, making me feel emotional. I almost feel like crying. These are such amazing stories. And you know how I got spurred onto this? This is kind of wrapping it back around to Dino Dig, getting us back on track here. Is David Temple said, hey, ask Chuck about music production. Because me and David were talking about, the podcast and kind of little things like that. And he's like, oh yeah, go ask Chuck about music production. And I'm thinking, okay, Chuck, maybe has a little home recording studio like I do, a little setup. He does his own home recordings, kind of a hobbyist type thing. No. One of his audio mixing consoles was George Lucas's console that he used for Star Wars and other films. I'm like, what? Who are you? Anyways, I'm going to be sure to get Chuck on here. And in that podcast for sure, I'm going to have his music on here too. Forgive me for chewing up the first going on 3 minutes here, a little over 3 minutes here of the Beyond Bones podcast of just gushing about Chuck. I'm so excited. I'm going to go sit next to him at dinner. Tonight is actually, I'm recording the podcast before dinner. This is a good way to segue back to the actual dig site. We had to leave the site a little bit early. I know if any of the members of the Dino Dig 2022 are listening to this, we had to leave a little bit early, and it's a good thing we did because the weather rolled in. We were watching the weather all day. The weather rolled in around 3:30, 4 o'clock when we left. So it was really good planning on Sarah's part, watching the radar to make sure that we don't get caught in a storm. Because here's the thing, and I took epic drone footage of this, epic video footage and glorious 4K. This is a good way to remind you right now. Everything I'm talking about here, I'm sure you've been listening and thinking, I really wish I could see what you're talking about. Rest assured, you very much will. I have gigs and gigs. I have dozens of gigs worth of footage in glorious 4K. I put you right on the bone. I get so close to these dinosaur bones and specimens that you can sense, that you can feel it. You can see so much nuance in the surface of these bones and the shots that I've got. It's going to blow your minds. I promise you that. So stay tuned to the HMNS Beyond Bones podcast. Make sure you're ready for when I release those videos. HMNS on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, type in HMNS or Houston Museum of Natural Science and get subscribed. I will put it in the link of this podcast description. But again, I just wanted to reassure you that when you're listening to these audio-only podcasts and saying, gee, I wish I could see that tooth he was talking about. I wish I could see that bone he was talking about. I wish I could see who's talking. I wish I could see the group. You will. Believe me, and it will be worth the wait. If you don't want to wait, I have been posting regularly to our HMNS Facebook page and Twitter. So if you want to see photos of, an Allosaur tooth, if you want to see some epic drone shots, if you want to see some little GIFs that I've made of Chuck doing the bone or stone test by licking the bone and licking the specimen and seeing if it sticks to his tongue. Bones are more porous, it'll stick to the tongue. Stones are not as porous and will roll off the tongue. It's just interesting to see Chuck pull something out of the dirt and put it in his mouth. But I have that on Facebook. So if you're wanting to get a sneak peek of what I've been filming and what I've been doing up here in Wyoming, then check out HMNS on our social media. You can see pictures and little short videos and GIFs with a G that I've been posting to Facebook and Twitter. But again, rest assured, HMNS YouTube channel. Once I get back to Houston, start putting this together, it's going to be worth the wait. The footage is epic. The BHI team walks up to me sometimes when I'm using my camera, which for you tech geeks out there is the Panasonic Lumix S5. If any of y'all are videographers, y'all know that this is a camera that ain't messing around. This is a world-class 4K camera. It's going to look exceptional. But the BHI team sometimes walks up to me, just kind of joking around, getting any good shots? And I'm like, Joey, it's hard not to get great shots up here. This place is so inspiring. Anywhere you point the camera, you're going to get a glorious shot. Even if you're not looking at a dinosaur bone, even if you're just looking at the hills and the trees and where we are, there's nowhere I can point the camera that's not going to be epic. Well, maybe not the porta potties. Anyways, about the weather and the weather rolling in, which I've documented, which you'll see. It's not just about being stuck in the rain and getting wet and being uncomfortable. It's about getting stuck, period. We're up on the side of a mountain that's the tracks leading up, the road tracks, and believe me, I did a drone shot where I followed the truck up the hill so y'all can see the path we're taking. If that track gets too much rain, I think they said anything more than a quarter inch or so of rain, you're stuck. You're stuck there until it dries out. It could be the next day. It could be a day or two, depending on how much rain. So we needed to move out before the rain came so that we didn't get stuck up on top of the mountain. Again, so it wasn't just about being uncomfortable and, things getting wet. It was about being stuck for potentially days on the top of a mountain in Wyoming. So it is 7 minutes, 45 seconds-ish into the podcast now. Let's get into some updates from the dig site. I mentioned the Allosaur tooth that we found. John actually found it. He's a member of the HMNS Dino Dig 2022 team here. I call us a team. I should call us a family. We've been becoming quite knit. A few podcasts ago, I mentioned that if you come on one of these HMNS excursions, you're not without a friend long, and you make lifelong friends within the first day. Anyways, John found a very sizable Allosaur tooth. I posted it up on our Twitter. You can see a picture of it up on our Twitter account, HMNS on Twitter. I'll include the link below in the podcast description if you want to go see it. But I talked to John about the discovery of this tooth. John, you just found the largest Allosaurus tooth I've ever seen in person from a dig site. How does that feel?
It's pretty awesome. This tooth just emerged as I was sweeping away dirt, and sitting in the dirt, it just looked like a beautiful, shiny, serrated, big tooth. And Pete told me that it is a premaxillary tooth from an adult large Allosaurus, which is pretty neat.
Pretty neat, John says. What a humble expression from a man who just found a tooth, an amazing tooth, an amazingly preserved tooth from one of the most dominant apex predators of all time. I would have, I'm 38 years old, so, I don't think I'm that old, but I'm definitely not that young. And I know some of y'all listening who are a little older than me remember being 38, which probably has some fond memories of health, maybe. But you know that at 38 years old, it's not like I could actually do a backflip. Not anymore. My heart feels 17. My soul feels like I'm 17, 18 years old. If I found an Allosaurus tooth, I would have felt like doing a backflip before my body said, nah, Not happening, bud. It was, so this is our third day on the bones, and for me, even though it was kind of cut short, in many ways, maybe getting out of the sun a little early is one of the reasons why it was a great day, we made some amazing finds. Some genuinely amazing finds. I'm still keeping on Dorian. I'm checking on him to see. I want him to have his big discovery. It seems like a few members of the group have discovered some pretty big bones and specimens and really nice looking teeth. I checked in with Dorian. I didn't get a soundbite from him today, but he's been finding fragments, so he has been finding bones, but he has not made the giant discovery yet that others in the group have been making. He'll find it. I think we should put him on a different spot. So anyway, I had a question as I'm standing there looking, observing the dig site, just seeing what I can get into, seeing what I can photograph, film, take drone shots of, whatever. Something kind of dawned on me. I was looking in the distance, maybe a mile away. It's hard to gauge distances when you're out in this wide open space. Is that mountain a half mile away? Is it 10 miles away? How can you tell? I'm looking at the trees. Those trees look small on the side of the mountain. That mountain's probably 3 or 4 miles away. Anyways, there's a higher ridge that we are more or less in the shadow of. Actually, we're not in the shadow of it. The sun doesn't move that direction while we're out there to cast a shadow on us. Anyways, it was a ridge that is maybe a quarter mile away from us, and I just had this question dawn on me. And I asked Alex from BHI, from the Black Hills Institute, why are the bones we're finding so close to the surface of these hills and not buried down so deep? I thought it was a good question.
So, in actuality, most of the time, for paleontologists, Mother Nature does a lot of the work for us. Erosion, the forces of nature, wind, water, snow, ice. This exposes fossils at the surface for us to find. That lets us know it's a fossil-bearing strata. Mm-hmm. And so we know what to collect here. And we know we can dig in, and we might find something more. There are other reasons, like, for example, this is part of the Black Hills uplift. So it's been lifted up and exposed. So it's all being exposed here. It's all being weathered down. Very erosive environment, right?
Yeah. How far down from the top of the hill? Was that 6 or 7 feet maybe that we're digging? From the top?
Yeah, I would say about 8 feet, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, about 8 feet. But they were finding fossils all the way up there. So Elaine Waugh, when she was little, she found a bunch of fossil bones, and she would toss them into the reservoir because she didn't know what they were. They were just rocks, right? Mm-hmm. But she was finding bones all the way up here. In fact, right underneath that shed, as we speak, there could be bones waiting for us to get. We just haven't gotten there yet.
How far down do you think we could find bone?
See right here, there's this yellow limestone layer?
Yeah.
Right there. We only find bones pressed in on top of that. However, beneath that, all the way down here, in a quarry, that's the first quarry we dug here, there are bones down there. So there's repeating layers. So potentially very far down. But it's all about where the formation is exposed. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It does. What gives us, could there possibly be bones, or are there likely bones? So this ridge about a mile away right there, could there be at the top of that too?
We were looking actually, and there could be, and there could actually be bones way down on the road you guys came in on. In fact, there are bones withering out there from where a good friend of ours used to camp in here.
A few moments later, Alex caught up with me and said he had a little addendum to add.
So we find fossils because they're eroding out of the ground, but it's important to note that fossils themselves are subject to erosion. So as soon as they're exposed, they're being destroyed. So that's important why the Houston Museum is here with Black Hills Institute. They're collecting these fossils that are subject to the forces of nature. And that's why we need fossil collectors everywhere, of all stripes.
What an interesting point, that by the time Mother Nature helps us find bone by doing most of the erosion for us, basically bringing the bones to us, by the time they're at the surface, the same Mother Nature is eroding those bones. So it's up to us and people like us and other fellow adventurers and paleontologists, both professional and layman, to help secure those bones and preserve those bones. While a lot of the members today, just like the days before, were finding bones, and some finding big bones and big teeth, others weren't so lucky, and today Kenneth wasn't so lucky. Kenneth, have you found anything special today or got any updates for us?
Not really. Mostly just moved a lot of dirt. Found a couple of small fragments, but nothing real exciting so far. Found a little tip of something. Thought it would if I dug deep enough, it might turn into something, but turned into just a little tip.
Well, I thought as we start moving towards the end of this podcast today, we'd check in with another member of the Black Hills Institute crew and check in with Joey.
I'm pretty excited and very hopeful about this project. People are finding stuff. I'm really impressed by the astragalus that was found over here. That's a big ankle bone for those if you don't know. That's really impressive how big these animals are. I mean, the astragalus is like almost, I'm not going to say bowling ball size, but I don't know how else to.
What about what you're digging up right here?
Right here might be a bone. It could just be just this little rock here. Trying to figure it out. But I'm excited. I'm always excited for anything that gets found. So it doesn't matter if it's, a tooth or a femur. It's all exciting.
Oh yeah. There's a lot to be said for what Joey just mentioned about not knowing what you're going to find and just being excited about examining what you think you may have found. In my experience digging, I have not been digging nearly as long as other members of the group because I've been running around with the camera, documenting their digs and flying the drone around and doing all sorts of cool stuff. But when I was digging the other day, and I dug for a little bit today, it's the dig for me at least, and maybe it's because I haven't been down in the dirt for 16 hours straight finding nothing. But for me, it's very fascinating to find, here's something with a new color, here's something that has a new texture, here's something that maybe even smells a little bit different. Or if you're adventurous like Chuck and David, here's something that tastes a little different. But it's just the thrill of the hunt and then finding something new. It's because it's not just dinosaur bones that's interesting. It's not just the teeth that are interesting, the specimens that are interesting. To me, it's also interesting when I come across ancient wood. A lot of the time, you're coming across ancient wood. Sometimes it comes in the form of coal. And that's fascinating to me. As I'm talking to other paleontologists, Peter and Alex and the rest of the BHI crew, when you find wood underneath the strata there, it's sometimes a good indicator, just like variations in the stone. Sometimes it's a good indicator that there might be bones nearby, that it could be a tree that maybe a dinosaur felled. It could be a tree that was swept away in a flood, and in the flood it might have uplifted a bunch of bones too. Basically, from what I understand in my limited paleontology career, is that when you come across wood, you might very well be on the scent of bone. So it's very fascinating to me to even come across something as mundane as wood or coal, because it means you may be close to bone. And here's the interesting thing too, as we start wrapping up this episode, this edition of the podcast, you're finding all sorts of different sizes of things. If someone has this idea that paleontology is basically you hit a bone and then there's the entire rest of the Allosaurus skeleton or the T-Rex skeleton or the Brachiosaurus skeleton, that is not anywhere close to reality. Sometimes it does happen that way. As Peter was telling me, sometimes you do find a fully articulated skeleton. If the animal died in that spot and then it just rested for millennia, completely undisturbed by, no floods, no earthquakes, and anything to disturb its resting place, then yeah, you could potentially find a relatively complete articulated skeleton from the tip of its tail up to its skull. Possibly, there'll be things missing in between. There'll be parts of the skeleton that are just too deteriorated to use. But you may also find just fragments of bones. You may find a femur over here. You may find a tibia over here. You may find part of a metatarsal over here. You might find a toe over here. You might find a pelvis or a piece of a pelvis over here. And then that's part of the mystery. That's part of the thrill of identifying what you're finding and putting the pieces together. That's the science, and that's the hunt. And I think that's what keeps paleontologists so floored. I'm sure a lot of paleontologists might say that they wouldn't complain if every time they put their pick in the ground they found a complete skeleton. I don't think there's a paleontologist alive who would turn their nose up at that notion. But part of the thrill, like I said, is finding the pieces and putting the pieces together. How many of you listening enjoy puzzles? It's almost exactly like that. It's a good analogy to think about. If you bought a puzzle and you opened the box and it was complete, what's the point? It's almost like the process of putting the puzzle together and seeing it come together, and the thrill of getting two pieces that match up and finding that piece that you've been hunting for hours, and it finally fits in just right, and it makes it kind of starts to complete the picture. That's the thrill of it. That's the fun of it. And I would imagine that in paleontology, it's the same way. A lot of times we're talking about, I walk up to people who find a bone, or I walk up to Peter who's kind of taking one bone and another bone and kind of trying to fit them together and see how they work. I'll ask him, what is this a bone fragment of? Like, what species, what dinosaur? And he's like, it's all we know is it's a dinosaur from the period that we're working in today. We don't know if it's a Brachiosaurus yet. We don't know if it's an Allosaurus yet. We don't know if it's a Triceratops or Stegosaurus yet, but it is a bone. It is a mystery, and it leading us further along this journey, leading us further to the conclusion. And just finding the bone chunk at all is a thrilling experience. It's a dinosaur that died millions and millions and millions and millions of years ago. If you're listening to this podcast and you're not here, boy, do we wish you were here. If it happens again, if we have the Dino Dig, in the future, make sure you sign up for it. It's an amazing, amazing experience. I was thinking earlier, as I wrap up the podcast here, how some people go on vacation to Hawaii or to Europe. Some people go hunt for dinosaur bones in Wyoming. At any rate, thank you so much for listening to the Beyond Bones podcast and an update from HMNS Dino Dig 2022. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been a pleasure bringing these podcasts to you. Stay tuned for the next episode. I'm going to get David Temple on here a lot more, so stay tuned for that and strap in. But anyways, until next time, stay safe and stay curious.